Watching the downfall of pillars of popular culture like Disney as they collapse into failure after failure is something I'm still kind of bewildered by. Like, how can you own that much priceless intellectual property, from classic Disney fairy tales to Marvel to the Star Wars franchise, and not find yourself strolling down a corridor of just inevitable success? And yet their stock price has been consistently dropping over the past 4 years. And this habit of reducing your creative output to like a remake factory probably has something to do with it. But even if that's all you were, you'd think that that would still be a recipe for success. But the spectacular box office disaster of movies like Snow White are proving that what should be a sure thing apparently isn't. And this is significant because pop culture is pretty much the only kind of common culture we have in this postmodern industrial age, and it's been the defining variable shaping our perception of ourselves and our society for at least a few generations now. So to see it stalling and failing seems like a moment to reflect on, to see like what's going on. And as we do so, I think it reveals a fatal flaw in our current model of pop consumer culture as a substitute for authentic culture, because Disney should be able to remake classic stories like Snow White and turn a profit without even trying. I don't think you need to be on the vanguard of the zeitgeist to know how to turn a children's fairy tale into a multi-million-dollar production that people will want to see. And yet, for all their resources, like executive, production, artistic, marketing, and otherwise, Disney couldn't pull that off. Like, they could have just gone the safe route and done a shot-for-shot remake of the original Snow White and known that it would have been profitable. So why take the risks of trying to reinvent the story? And the only answer I can come up with is because the original story had the wrong message. It didn't convey the right moral instruction. But that's a weird conclusion, because this is the same pop industrial complex that cranks out movies like The Human Centipede or The Substance or Terrifier 3, none of which I've seen, but I've been told they do everything they can to cross boundaries of common decency by reducing whatever is noble in human dignity to just raw material for our grotesque amusement. And there are countless charting pop songs that glorify things like gang violence, sexual exploitation, misogyny, hatred towards especially religious groups. They're filled to the brim with epithets, vulgarity, and slurs. And yet, the same industry with the same executive leadership looked at the original Snow White and said, no, this is morally intolerable. If we want to reproduce it, we're going to have to fundamentally change its message to something that is tolerable and acceptable. That obviously doesn't make any sense, but they're clearly so committed to these ends that they're willing to risk even their own profitability in the service of whatever message they're trying to advance. So what is so wrong about Snow White? And in asking that, we might also ask, what is so wrong about the original Cinderella that the 2021 remake had to completely reshape the main character's destiny, or the Little Women remake, in which marriage is seen as an imposition to be avoided rather than an aim, or the Aladdin remake, in which Jasmine's primary goal is career rather than romance. And if I had to pinpoint the common denominator in all these remakes, the thing that they've identified as being intolerable in their stories is anything that appears to be traditional. Like, imagine someone proposing a movie script whose aim was to celebrate traditional moral virtue and culture. It would immediately get dismissed and refused. There's no way something like that would be produced in Hollywood today. If there's going to be a message in pop culture media today, it's going to be one about destabilization, about overthrowing established ways of life, about revolution. So we celebrate the strange, the novel, the exceptional, even the grotesque. G.K. Chesterton wrote that a good story is one in which like a normal person has been thrown into a crazy world and has to negotiate the ensuing conflict and struggle. But the modern story, he says, is about a crazy person thrown into a normal world who creates conflict wherever they go. What we have in today's cultural vanguard is an elite class of executives and performers who are frankly crazy people who find anything stable and normal intolerable, and will use everything available to them to distort and to reshape it in their own image, which is why pop culture is fundamentally anti-culture. Because what is true culture? True culture is the embodiment of the beliefs, the practices, the rituals, and the moral values and virtues of a particular people. In other words, culture is the embodiment of tradition. Tradition is the knowledge and the way of life that has been handed down from one generation to another so that descendants don't have to rediscover everything that their ancestors already solved. It's the provision of one generation trying to help out future generations. And culture is one of the best ways to transmit that knowledge through stories and songs, through festivals, through etiquette and decorum, and on and on. It's how especially younger people are immersed in a way of life that becomes second nature to them because it's embodied for them all around them as they're at an impressionable age. But today, all we have is a for-profit industrial model of culture whose aim is to prevent tradition from being transmitted while also exploiting the young and vulnerable for profit incentives, which has never been done before. We've never had an elite class claim intellectual ownership over the fixtures of culture and then sell it back to the people. Like this past summer, my family went camping with a bunch of other families from our church and homeschool co-op community. And one night we just got out a bunch of instruments and some folk song books and started singing songs around the campfire. There were people, dancing and clapping and singing their hearts out. And it was honestly one of the funnest evenings I've had in recent memory. And that's what authentic culture looks like. And that's a threat to the entertainment industry because the more secure you are in your identity as a member of a family, a tribe, a religion, and a culture that satisfies all the restless longings we have for music and stories and communities and ritual, the less interested we are in having shallow supplementary versions that are then sold back to us as entertainment. It's called folk culture for a reason. It means it arises from and belongs to the folk, the people. But as long as something belongs to the people, you can't make any money off of it by then trying to sell what they already have. But the entertainment industry managed to do just that for at least a while getting their start by retelling folk and fairy tales sampled from true sources of culture. But the more they've tried to move away from traditional culture and replace it with their own counterfeit, the more they've literally lost the plot. So the two ways that pop culture competes with and opposes true culture is in its aims, which are obstructing the transmission of tradition and in seeking for profit off of something that should belong to the people. So it obscures our heritage and our inheritance, something that would benefit us immensely, something that would enrich our lives if we knew about it, and replaces it with a wholesale fabrication invented by people who care nothing for the well-being of society or community. And because it's repackaged into a for-profit consumer product, it also opposes another fundamental purpose of true culture, which is to bring people together into community through a shared way of life. True culture gives us a common language, a common rhythm, a common creed, and all that accessorizes those things to promote what is shared between us. But consumer capitalism has the opposite effect. It exposes our individualism with individual appetites, preferences, and identities. And this works to the advantage of the profiteers, because the more isolated you are as the consumer, the more dislocated from community you are, the more impressed you will be by their products. Like my kids and their friends are in the habit of singing folk songs that they've learned through the culture that we've been trying to raise them in. They sing things like rounds, as well as even choral music like polyphony. When they're doing their evening chores like the dishes, my kids will often break out into Latin polyphony just spontaneously. And the effect is this wholesome, beautiful environment and solidarity with one another. They feel a sense of belonging with each other as a tribe. And because I was raised in the vulgar, profane world of popular culture, I still have attachments to some of the music I grew up with. And whenever I turn it on, my kids are immediately repelled by it because it really is a low quality music compared to what they're used to, with frankly a limited appeal. That's why we have like 100 genres in popular music. If you can divide people into individual identities, it's much easier to sell them products that they otherwise wouldn't be that interested in because they gain so much satisfaction from belonging in community. Like even growing up with two brothers who had a lot in common, we still found ourselves divided by pop culture preferences. I liked heavy metal, for example. My little brother liked emo at one point, and my older brother liked grunge music at that same time. And as close as those things are to each other, it prevented us from having a fundamental part of what makes us human and what draws out our affections in common. If the cafeteria model of pop culture is effective in even preventing siblings from having common culture, what hope does the rest of society have? And I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record at this point, but this is why the church cannot adopt the model of culture that is sold to us by the entertainment industry. It's fundamentally incompatible with true culture, with community, and with true worship. True worship of God binds us in community. Pop culture, by design, divides us into individualist enclaves. Like, ask yourself why we use music and art in our worship. Well, because it enhances our ability to worship God, because it helps raise our hearts and minds to Him, but also because it fosters unity among the faithful when they perform something together through culture. But music drawn from a postmodern popular culture has the opposite effect. It fosters individualism through the promotion of consumer choice and preference, which is why any attempt at incorporating the flavors and styles of popular culture into our modes of worship, it'll just wreak havoc in our worship and in our communities. Like, imagine if you were going to try to encourage unity in a community by saying that from now on, everyone will only ever wear the same color of clothing. You would never be able to get consensus on that. You'd never be able to get everyone to agree because we're so conditioned to seek after our own personal taste when it comes to something like our fashion preferences. But in worship in the church, we do have to decide on one kind of music. We're not going to sing 20 different songs simultaneously. But if we sample from the various styles of consumer pop culture, what are the odds we'll pick something that will foster unity in the congregation, that's something that everyone will like and identify with? I would say literally zero. It would be impossible, which is why we should utterly avoid drawing cultural inspiration from a paradigm predicated on personal preference, which is all that pop culture is. Which is why sacred music, like Gregorian chant in the Latin Rite, is the perfect solution. It isn't a genre of music at all. It's certainly not a genre of entertainment. It's simply the pattern of setting prayers to melody. There's no percussion that you have to try to shoehorn the verbiage of prayers into. There's no instruments, no style or flair, just simple, humble melody, which is born out of the church's culture of prayer. Percussive folk music, country music, rock music, and whatever else plays on the radio serves the purpose of revelry and self-focused amusement. There's nothing sacred or unifying about it. And that's pretty important, because if you want to know what something is, a key thing to ask is, what is its purpose? If you don't know what the purpose of an axe is, you don't know what an axe is. If you don't know what the purpose of a bidet is, then you're likely going to be pretty confused when you see one for the first time. The purpose of culture is to transmit tradition while fostering community through what is common. But the purpose of pop culture is to obscure what is traditional in favor of the novel and unusual, while dividing people into consumerist identities in order to maximize profits. Those two things are antithetical to each other, and it lies at the heart of why our society is so divided, why people are so lonely, why people are so desperate for a sense of identity that they'll even reduce their entire human dignity to mere sexual appetite just to find some identity in the world. And it's also why we've lost all sense of the transcendent. The reason we're so addicted to the entertainment industry is because we're bored. The reason we're bored is because we're lonely. The reason we're lonely is because we have no common culture that binds us to community. And the reason we have no community is because we rely on the entertainment industry to give us our culture. And then the cycle just repeats itself like a bad addiction. Okay, thanks for watching that. I hope that was a blessing to you, that it encouraged you and edified you in your journey with the Lord. And if it did, and if you want to support the work that we're doing as a result, which thank you so much for considering that, because we really do need your help to make this viable. Then there's a few ways you can do that. You can go to brianholdsworth.ca/help, which is obviously my website. And there's some options there. One is to just contribute through my website. The other would be to join us over on Locals, where you can interact with me and other like-minded people. You can gain access to exclusive content, where we're doing live streams and I'm uploading videos and things like that. But we're also doing a secret philosophy study with a secret philosopher academic who's joining us once a month to take us through difficult texts that we want to read on our own, but we need some clarification and some guidance on that. So right now we're working through some works by St. Thomas Aquinas with him, and he's a Thomistic philosopher. So if that's interesting to you, join me on brianholdsworth.locals.com. And again, you can check out my website at brianholdsworth.ca/help.